What's up, everybody? I know this isn't our typical style here at Shady Sports Network, but I wanted to record a quick preamble to this video. It's been a little bit since me and Pat recorded this episode, and so I wanted to explain why we're releasing this so late. So I took a little bit of time to actually edit this, add some stuff from his channel, etc., so we could help promote Pat and his new journey on his YouTube channel. But at the same time, I also wanted to create this preamble to explain that Jeff Fisher has stepped down as the head coach for the Michigan Panthers and has been replaced by Mike Nolan. However, I left our conversation in here about Jeff Fisher because I think Pat says some comments about Fisher's wants, desires in life that kind of were very telling about why he ended up stepping down and why he moved away from the USFL. So go ahead and pay attention to what Pat has to say about what Jeff wanted with life and why he may have stepped away from the league. Because I think this has more to do with what Jeff Fisher wants in his own life than it does the USFL. So that was very important for me to add in here. I think that, going forward, we'll find out more and more about what Fisher's doing with his life. But I ultimately think that he might be done with football for the rest of his career. Maybe we see him resurface somewhere as like an advisor, but I ultimately do not think that he will be returning to the NFL or anything of that sort in the near future. But thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And like I said, pay close attention to what Pat says about Jeff Fisher, because I think he has some really good comments on why Fisher may have. All right. Tonight I am joined from Mr. Pat Rifino from XFL News Hub and USFL News Hub. He covers the Battle Hawks and the Panthers. So tonight we're going to be talking about some USFL and some XFL. How are you doing today, Pat?
I'm doing really well, man. Thank you for having me on. About time.
Absolutely. I know, right? It's been a long time coming. I'm excited to definitely chop it up with you here. For anybody who doesn't know, you definitely should be following Pat on Twitter at NFL QB Talk. Basically, he tracks all the salary information, the statistics, the QB movement, or really the movement of every player, if I'm being quite honest. So these are like the things that, you would get from like ESPN, but on an independent level for alternate football leagues. So like unprecedented coverage, in my personal opinion. So definitely love what he does for the leagues. But anyways, let's get into your most recent article. You wrote an article detailing the 16 best quarterbacks, in your opinion, in the XFL. So quick, I'm going to run down it real quick. At number 16, you had Kevin Anderson from Arlington. 15 was De'Ara King. Jack Cohn, 14, San Antonio. Drew Plitt, 13 from Arlington. Steven Montez, Seattle at 12. DeAndre Francois at 11 from Orlando. Cole McDonald at 10 from Houston. Reed Sinnett, 9, San Antonio. Silvers from Houston at 8. Perez from Vegas at 7. Ryan Willis from St. Louis at 6. Ben DiNucci, Seattle, 5. AJ McCarron, St. Louis, 4. Kyle Sloter, number 3, Arlington. Brian Scott at number 2 for Vegas. And then the number 1 quarterback from the XFL is Jordan Ta'amu, based on what he did in the XFL in 2020 as well as what he did in the USFL. So I'm curious how you ultimately came to these rankings and what ultimately kind of determined which quarterback you were going with for number 1.
Well, personally, I just kind of go off the latest sample size. Jordan Ta'amu's stats might be a little bit it's the best word I'm looking for, kind of inflated due to the fact he was running around for his life and sometimes and whatnot. But the guy's definitely, his rushing ability is probably one of the more underrated factors of his game. The Bandits slash Showboats had one of the worst offensive lines last year, and they couldn't really get into a groove despite having Todd Haley there to kind of nurture him and whatnot. So if he does go with DC, he's kind of in prime position to at least start off the season as the number 1 QB, because based off the recent sample size of everyone, he has the most attractive track record. He is off my post-2000 alt league QB passing statistics, which encompass the UFL, XFL 1.0 and 2.0, AAF, 2021 Spring League, and then the USFL. he is a top 5 career passer in about 15 games. He's thrown 19 career touchdowns, over 3,000 yards. So the guy's a baller for sure. Been bounced around a lot of NFL camps, so that does tell you something about his ability to perform to these NFL teams. And while I don't think he'll ever matriculate into, a long-term starter or even a long-term backup in the NFL, he's definitely a serviceable pro quarterback, and he's definitely in the top tier of the guys they have now.
That's a very fair assessment. I was a big fan of Jordan Ta'amu in the 2020 XFL. I thought he was a phenom. I personally thought that he was one of the more exciting players in the 2020 XFL. As you spoke about, the Bandits had a really rough offensive line last year, could not run the ball to save their lives. And Jordan Ta'amu was tasked with basically carrying the offense, not living the offense, carrying the offense. So it was one of those things where he needed some more help, and he never got it. So hopefully he can get that in DC, which seems to have a pretty stacked roster. So there were a couple other guys on this list that stood out to me personally, and one of the names that obviously is quite interesting to look at given the fact that we got this news today is Brian Scott. I mean, Brian Scott's now apparently gone from Vegas. You had him ranked very highly based on what he did with the Spring League and the USFL, where he was very efficient. How has he changed in your ranking given what happened today? And what factors do you ultimately put into his ranking in terms of his relatively small sample size last season?
It all comes down to the Spring League and what he was progressing in the USFL. I personally think he would have been the all USFL quarterback if he didn't get hurt. You see the numbers Cookus put up there. You put them together, it was top-tier quarterback play for the position in the USFL. He has unofficially the most yards, touchdowns of the 4 years of the Spring League between all those guys. And the Spring League had some pretty decent guys show up. Zach Mendenberger was there, a couple other smaller school prospects. I believe even David Ash was there at one point in the earlier years. So the Spring League definitely has put semi-NFL caliber players through the grinder. Another guy, McLeod Bethel Thompson in 2020. I don't know if Cole McDonald was there. I want to say he was. I'm not 100% sure. But they've put together some pretty decent guys that have run through, and they didn't really record statistics officially until 2021. So his stats are kind of a bit altered, because if I'm going to compare his 2020 and 2018 stats, I have to compare all those guys, and I don't have that data. But if you saw the way the stars were beginning to mature around him and what Cookus did, there's no telling what Scott would have did in a full year with Bart Andrus. Now, are they winning the championship? That I have no idea about. Kind of reminds me of what is it? Bruce Arians always says, "No risk it for the biscuit," or something like that. He's kind of got that little swag towards him as well. But with him off the list and Paxton Lynch coming in, personally, I bump everyone up, and then I put Lynch at number 10 over DeAndre Francois. That would be my new list. And I know Hundley was signed. I mean, he's an NFL caliber quarterback, but he hasn't played in a while. Even in the spot start, we saw McCarron play in, and factoring his University of Alabama playing time and whatnot, he's kind of got a little bit more of a recent sample size than Hundley, where Hundley's been cut a couple times and whatnot, while McCarron was still viewed as a priority backup, a top 64 quarterback in the league. So I wouldn't put Hundley on the list yet. Now, week 1, he comes out, he does pretty well. Great, put him on there. I don't care. But looks like the Vipers are going to go with Perez, at least for week 1. Maybe week 2, Hundley comes in, gets a little familiar with the system, but riding with Luis Perez, man. Alt League Alex Smith.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I personally still think that Hundley might start week 1, but I guess we'll see exactly what happens. I just feel like you don't make that move if you don't ultimately have designs on Hundley being your guy full time. But I could be proven wrong. Luis Perez has proven me wrong before. I didn't think he would make it as far as he did last season, but the Generals were dominant with him at the helm. So it's hard to argue what he's done the past couple of years. So another guy that I really wanted to talk about was actually Luis Perez. I mean, he's number 7 on this list, despite the fact that prior to this move, he was going to be a backup. So, I mean, with him splitting time with DeAndre Johnson last season, and the fact that he was, in fact, headed into this season as the number 2, what were the things that ultimately led to him being listed so high?
He's just been consistent over every league. He's got a winning record with the Jousters, with the Iron, with the Guardians, with the Generals. He's a winning quarterback. He gives you that 185 to 215, 1 touchdown, 2 touchdown, takes care of the football. He's a professional. He's run through many systems. He's been in all the leagues. He's been on a couple NFL teams. You know, he knows how to pick it up, and I don't think he got the fairest shot. They talked about that on the Marcast. You know, coming into the season as QB4 on a late signing. But ultimately, if you want a consistent guy at the end of this season, if he starts all 10 games and plays all 10 games, you know, don't be surprised. Luis Perez, 1,500 yards, 15 to 1,800 yards, 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Sounds like a pretty reasonable season for them. With a nice 7-3, 6-4 record.
I would agree. I mean, yeah, one of the things about him that you can always count on, which in my mind made him the best backup in the XFL by a long shot, is the fact that he always going to protect the football. He's efficient, and he's not going to put you in bad positions at any point in time. Like, you're not going to be in 3rd and long a whole lot with Luis Perez at quarterback. He'll take the check down and get the 3 yards on 2nd down if that's what it takes, you know? So, I mean, personally, I like him as a backup. I'm just not sold on him as the number 1. Personally, I think he's a little bit limited arm strength wise, but I see your point. He is definitely one of those guys that he's very adept at being a game manager. So I think that he definitely has a place in this league for sure.
Yeah, he definitely does have his limitations, but in the end, it is an alt league. He's been in the alt league. He's succeeded in the alt league. So why, based off going off analytics and just our recent sample sizes from him for the last 4 years, why would we think he'd do anything different?
Absolutely. And I think the numbers that you were suggesting for him, you know, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, that's not really, you know, astronomical numbers. So that's very in the realm of possibility for a guy like Perez, who, even if he is physically limited, he knows how to, you know, hit a dump off and a slant route pretty well. So, I mean, with those things, you can chop up a defense all day long, basically. So
yeah, I think he has 24 touchdowns and over 3,600 yards throughout 4 seasons in the alt leagues. So
where does he rank in terms of overall passing yards on your list?
He's number 1 in both categories.
Okay, that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
I mean, he's, like you said, he's been so consistent through all these different leagues. It's kind of amazing to see him continue to find, you know, ways to see the field over and over and over again, it seems like.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a professional, and to count him out would just be, I would say, downright disrespectful towards him. So, I mean, go ahead, count him out. But in the end, it's an alt league. We're going to see at least 6 or 7 of these teams start 2 guys at least once. So whether it be injury, performance, whatever it is, we're going to see everyone play at some point. So if we're going off history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody looks good on paper, and then you hit the field, and then, you know, things change real quick. So you're right. And chances are we'll see 17 to 20 quarterbacks this season one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple other guys that really stuck out to me on this list was Seattle's quarterback room. They've done some interesting things. You know, they brought in Harrison Frost, who's actually draft eligible in 2023, which I thought was very interesting. And then they also got a couple NFL I don't want to say necessarily veterans, but like journeyman veterans who have bounced around the league quite a bit in Ben DiNucci and Steven Montez. So in your personal opinion, in terms of overall quarterback rooms, where would you rate Seattle?
I would say mid-tier, but something you need to look at in DiNucci is he has gotten better every year he's played. So if you look, he came in 2020, got thrusted into this COVID year. Didn't look that good, but didn't look that bad. And I know it's kind of like a general, middle of the line, but that's it. He's a rookie from James Madison. I think he went to Pitt at one point. I can't remember. But just rookie kid thrown in there, limited OTAs, limited everything. Hey man, good luck type thing. Then they played in the preseason in 2021, looked a lot better, and then in 2022 he actually looked pretty good. But Will Greer had just a better preseason than him, and they probably went off numbers and potential. And I do think Will Greer is a better quarterback than Ben DiNucci, and that's why Will is in the NFL and Ben's not. You bring in Steven Montez, who could really fit into like a Taysom Hill type role. He's a big guy, athletic, underrated athlete. Their collegiate passing stats, I believe, were kind of similar when I looked it up. But in the end, Montez has been around NFL practice squads. He was with the Washington football team during the COVID year, and then the Lions part of 21 and in the last 3 weeks of 22. So they're able to, he's able to at least showcase something to these teams that he is a valuable member. And then Washington was actually going to use him as like a Taysom Hill type role, but then Taylor Heineke and Alex Smith kind of, forced that, took away that need for the gimmicky stuff, especially with, rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins struggling.
I was not aware of the fact that he was going to be used in that role. That would have been very interesting. Obviously, I'm a Colorado native, so I've followed Montez since he graduated from CU. I'm a big fan. I mean, I'm super excited to see him actually see the field for the first time since Colorado, yeah. Yep. So, I mean, it'll be exciting to see. Hopefully he gets some snaps this year, which I ultimately think he will. But Ben DiNucci is no slouch either. I personally think that's one of the better quarterback rooms in the league, just based on what they've done. And I like the fact that they also got Harrison Frost, a very young guy that I mentioned before. So if you're a team – sorry, go ahead.
It's a little intriguing because Montez kind of came late to camp, so they got a better look at Brian Lewerke. And I made a short little YouTube video about this, but they got a good look at Brian Lewerke to see if he was actually worth a damn, because he was probably taking QB2 reps, and they only had the 2 QBs on the roster with Montez still on the practice squad. And he probably had every opportunity to do something. Lewerke was with the Giants, average preseason, played in the spring league, kind of a middle of the pack guy. And I mean, he couldn't get it done, and he missed out on the USFL because he was on their futures roster for a little bit and got cut in May of 2022. And then the USFL didn't even call him. And they signed guys like KJ Costello, Guy Myers, retreaded Shea Patterson, Josh Love. So, I mean, that just kind of tells you a little bit about how they viewed Lewerke moving forward as well. Not just the USFL, or not just the XFL, but the USFL as well.
That's a great point. Because one of the questions I was going to ask is, do we see any of these guys who are cut from the XFL resurface in the USFL? And I guess you kind of answer that question for Lewerke, but what about a guy like Mitch Kidd? Do you see Mitch Kidd landing in like the USFL, or do we see him back in the FCF?
Man, I don't know. I got to do a bigger deep dive, but he's a small guy. I know he's been on the show. There's only one FCF. There's 2 FCF quarterbacks I'd like to see in any of these alt leagues. It's Kelly Bryant, because I do think he is a outdoor type quarterback, and David Pindell. I think Pindell's done some good stuff in Europe. So I'm not saying he'd be a star in the USFL by any means. He might not even be a QB1, but I'd like to see him in the outdoor game, because I don't think he played in the spring league. And I think the spring league in 2021 was a very good measure of the talent that you're seeing in the XFL and USFL.
I would agree. Kind of, that 2021 year, I think, was like the sweet spot for I don't want to say extra, but excess quarterbacks, because of the extra eligibility from COVID and everything kind of meshing up there. It seemed like there was a group of quarterbacks that were NFL caliber that weren't in the league at the moment. So it was definitely very interesting to see that group kind of progress and where they've ended up at this point. If you're a team looking to ultimately add a quarterback, who are some of the guys you would look to?
It'd be Carson Strong, but I know everyone's afraid of his medicals. And there's a kid, he's out of Gannon University. His name is Corey Curtis. He's definitely an alt league guy. He's got NFL potential, played at Ohio State for a little bit. but those two guys are at the top of my list. And then you go further down that list, you got Lewerke, you got Chase Liddon, you got Pindell. But really, it comes down to who are you seeing in that undrafted free agent class as well, like coming out of 2023, if anyone sparks your interest there. A couple people have always, thrown the name Stenson Bennett around. I mean, after his little showcase this weekend, an alt league might be his only choice. And, I don't know if Stenson Bennett's an NFL QB, but he's got a lot of name and brand recognition that I think he's worth a shot in the XFL or USFL.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that actually crossed my mind. A lot of people are talking about the fact that he was, like a 5th or 6th round pick, maybe a 4th at best prior to this situation. Now with this situation, maybe he's a 7th round pick, priority free agent guy, So I could definitely see him being or seeing the, purpose of going to the USFL for a season and, kind of rehabbing his image. But with him being older, that's also one of those situations you have to watch too. One more season in the USFL or 2 seasons in the USFL, suddenly he's 30 years old or pretty close to it, and the NFL window's already shutting on him.
Yeah, I mean, but it comes down to what you want if you're Stetson Bennett. The best thing that could happen to him is honestly him being a free agent and then him choosing if any of these teams want him. Because then, you can go to a team like Cincinnati. Brandon Allen is their backup there. Jake Browning is their practice squad guy. Are you looking at those two guys and you're like, I'm better than them, I could beat them out? Versus maybe for this year that he got drafted by the Bucks or something like that, 7th round pick. And he has to go against Ryan Griffin, who's been with the organization for years and is Tom Brady's friend, Blaine Gabbert, who serviceable backup, Tom, obviously QB1, and then their project, Kyle Trask. So it's like, okay, yeah, great, I got drafted, but I'm at the Bucks. So what am I doing here?
So that's a completely fair point too. That's one of the things that we never quite talk about is the fact that fit's everything. If you are ultimately a guy in the bottom end of the draft, you're most likely better off falling to a free agency class where you can kind of pick and choose where you go and choose the proper fit for you as a player and ultimately where you're at in your career.
Yep.
So obviously you've tracked all the USFL to XFL movement. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we were at 68 players total.
I think so, with Osiris Mitchell and the kid on the Maulers, Beecham. I think his last name was Beecham, Abdul Beecham maybe. He was on the Maulers last year.
Okay, yeah, that was the post I saw from an analyst yesterday, I think it was, or 2 days ago. But anyway, yeah, so 68 players ultimately get drafted, selected, signed by the XFL. I think it was a total of 11 went back to the USFL. So I think a total of 57 players basically went over to the XFL. Was this more than you thought would be the case? Was it less, on par?
I mean, I think we don't really have data to gauge it. So, I mean, I'm kind of like, it is what it is type thing. Now, next year, we can talk about it a little bit more, and I can give you some more opinions that I have about it. But right now, I can't really gauge or comment on it because I have no idea. Like, if this is happening every year and we get the year 3 of both these leagues going at it, then yeah, if 1 year it's 60 and then 24, then I'm like, wow, that's unexpected. It's going to be the same thing with the signings going into next year. Some of these players they pick up are kind of cheap NFL signings. Like AJ McCarron probably is going to have a job. If he just plays serviceable. Luis Perez plays serviceable. Brett Hundley plays serviceable. They're going to get contracts. So it's kind of going to be like, okay, great. Like these guys who are in this cycle that they're always in, like always coming in for training camp. It's kind of a cheap, like, oh, we sent a guy to the NFL. Well, yeah, I mean, he was just on your practice squad 4 months ago, so you just wanted to add $100,000 to his bank account real quick, or whatever, 50 to $100,000 to his bank account in 5 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever it is.
Exactly. That was one of the things that I thought was funny that nobody really talked about. We talked about all the names that were going from the USFL to the NFL. What we didn't talk about is how many of those players had already had previous connections with those coaching staffs, had been on those rosters before, or had been with those coaches with another team before, and were getting signed as training camp bodies. And, again, at least they're getting the chance. At least they're making a little bit of money, like you said. But at the end of the day, was it ultimately an opportunity to truly make an NFL roster? That could be debated outside of guys like Maurice Alexander, Cavante Turpin, Micah Abernathy, the guys that are actually still in town, DeMarcus Gates, stuff like that. So it was one of those things where I thought it was kind of funny to see the USFL taking credit, and I'm sure we'll see the same from the XFL, but a lot of those connections were made long before the USFL was around.
Yeah, but you got guys like the specialists, like Ramiz Ahmad, playing in a game, spent the whole year with the practice squad, making about $210K. You got Tucker Addington being active and then being brought back for another year. There's a bunch of guys who were probably viewed as camp bodies that ended up contributing and whatnot as well.
100%. That's true. I mean, to be fair, at least they got their foot in the door. That is to be said. So obviously we talked about it very briefly in the intro. You specifically covered the Battlehawks. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting is the fact that Anthony Becht has only actually had one professional level coaching position prior to this in the AAF. So when people look at that and kind of question his ability to be a head coach, I mean, what would you say to people who are worried about his ability to transition to this level?
I mean, you could talk about that to any first-time head coach, regardless of experience or not. Beck does have the AAF experience, and he's working with a lot of guys around him who do have alt league experience and NFL experience. His coaching staff is very based in Missouri, or his playing days. There's a lot of connections to him. I mean, ultimately, it's going to come down to just how the players play on the field. Beck's a motivator of men. I've talked to him. He's a passionate guy, loves football, hits all those key points. He's been working as an analyst for the Jets and college football as well. So the guy is not a putz at all. 100% genuine dude. I had an awesome conversation with him at one of the town halls. Shout out to Brian Stoll for that. And I'm 100% confident in his abilities to lead this team. Especially if you look at his roster, he picked up a lot of veteran guys, not just from the NFL, but from the AAF days and XFL days as well. So him and Dave Buller, their DPP, went deep into the Rolodex to pick up guys who have played in these types of leagues, that have played in a situation where it's like, okay, guys, we got 4 weeks to get this going, like, man up or go home type thing. So there are a lot of key factors in that are going to play into this versus you have a little bit less experienced guys and coaches who maybe coaching in the NFL or in college, but haven't dealt with like the fast paced atmosphere of an alt league. So where these guys, you can't, run through a play that takes 15 seconds and you're just saying green 8 and that's a screen or something like that.
That's a great point. That is a great point. I mean, you look at the NFL and they have months of lead up to the season. So you have all kinds of time to install playbooks and all that stuff. So, these alt leagues are very much sped up and very contracted as far as the USF or the off season goes.
Yeah.
So obviously we all know Becht is a former tight end himself, and he's got some very interesting players in that position group. A guy like Hakeem Butler, who's kind of a wide receiver hybrid, Giovanni Haskins, Jalen Smith, Jake Sutherland, an XFL vet, and Jordan Thomas. In your opinion, how do you see this room ultimately shaken out by the time the regular season comes?
Well, you got Jordan Thomas, NFL vet, I think he's got like 25 career receptions, something like that, with the Texans. I think he played for the Colts for like 5 minutes. So he's kind of your roundabout guy, stereotypical tight end 2, can block, can also catch a pass if need be. Jalen Smith is a tweener as well. He's bounced around a couple practice squads. I think he was on the Seahawks for a couple weeks during the NFL season. He's going to be your more dynamic pass catching guy. And Jake Sutherland is your ox, man. That dude can block. He's, played for the Legends. I think he played for the Guardians as well in the XFL 2.0. So this dude's a mauler. He's going to beat you up. He's going to get inside. Love to see him put him in motion and just work as an auxiliary fullback if need be. So they have a pretty well-rounded tight end group, so much to the fact that they got rid of Charlie, kid out of Portland State. I can't say his last name, but he's got Polynesian last name. They got rid of him, sent him to Seattle, and that guy was a true pass catcher, tweener, kind of a poor man's Travis Kelce minus the blocking.
Absolutely. That was one of the big things that tipped me off is he's a guy that Charlie, I think it's Temenapu. Hopefully I didn't butcher that, but
Charlie T.
Yeah, exactly. Charlie T. So he got traded, and when I noted, when I saw that trade, I've seen his name countless times on an NFL transaction list. And anytime I notice a name that's reoccurring on an NFL transaction list in an alt league, I take notice, obviously. So this is one of those guys, and he's getting traded. So I was curious who was in the room. I knew about Jake. Jake came on the Jake Sutherland, that is. He came on our XFL draft coverage. Actually told us live during the draft that Anthony Becht was one of the guys that he was kind of keying in on where he might land because he had conversations with him in the past. So that was very interesting. But that room in general is just very talented. I was extremely excited to see Hakeem Butler, former Eagles guy who was making the conversion to tight end with the Eagles. So I'm interested to see how he ultimately makes that move as well.
Yeah, I think it comes down to it probably will come down to him and Thomas. I just think Thomas has the experience, and there's a reason why they went deep in the Rolodex for Sutherland. So a guy's been out of football for almost 3 years and then comes back. So you just don't give those guys a shot. Every roster spot is very precious. And with that being said, Butler might be the odd man out, especially I believe he was a late ad too. I think he was an Alumni Academy guy. I'd have to look back on that.
Definitely. So let's segue a little bit. You put out a tweet, I believe it was earlier today or yesterday, about the the money amount made by the USFL quarterbacks between their NFL and their USFL earnings. What was the figure that you came up with? I think it's going to shock some of our viewers.
Well, the figure now is like 34 million with the addition of Hundley, and before it was in that like 28. Going into the season, it was before Paxton Lynch transferred. It was about 24. It was either 18 or 24 million, and then now the USFL is around $5 million with Kyle Lauletta being the most experienced guy on their, I guess, Rolodex or whatever you want to call it.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely a huge jump from year one to year two. But at the same time, they're getting a lot of young guys. So hopefully these are high upside guys that ultimately prove them to, I guess, be lucky in their movement, their quarterback movement, to go from older, more veteran guys to younger, less established players. So Speaking of Paxton Lynch, he ended up in Orlando just a couple days ago. As we talked about, you cover the Michigan Panthers. What are your thoughts on the Panthers quarterback position given Lynch's leaving?
I mean, it's not the greatest place to be in. I'm a big Paxton Lynch guy. I think he really came on in that last game. When he had a little cameo in week 1 versus the Gamblers, those guys dropped about 4 or 5 passes, his receivers, on some beautiful balls he threw. And he, in my opinion, kind of got a bad shake. Then he got hurt, and he was, prior to that, he was in the CFL, kind of being that third QB guy, inactive guy and whatnot. So now that Lynch has some games under him, getting back into the football shape, he's wanted to go to the XFL for a while. Mike Mitchell has been on that hill for a minute, and him going to the Guardians, everyone's got them, ranked in the lowest thing. But regardless, Paxton goes out there, puts through a couple good games. Next thing you know, he's back in the NFL. So I mean, he's got the ability, he's got the arm strength. Now he just has to put together 8 good games or at least 8 games of film to see if he could still manage being out there. I mean, DeAndre Francois tore up the Fan Control Football League, but he actually was with the Spring League in 2021 and really didn't do anything too crazy. Kind of went back and forth with, I believe it was Nick Fitzgerald, the former Battlehawk, to see if he could even get on the field and whatnot. And, I mean, didn't wow you by any of his numbers by any means.
Absolutely. It'll be kind of interesting to see how this quarterback room goes. I ultimately think Lynch is going to be the starter at this point. And then on the flip side in Michigan, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they approach it. I personally expect them to add another name, whether it's, the recently released Brian Scott or it's somebody else entirely who, again, Mike Mitchell has mentioned Scott might be in Michigan. We'll see what happens with him. But ultimately, I think they're not in the worst position either. They've got a guy like Josh Lev that can turn the keys over to if that's what it takes. And I think Eric Barriere is honestly a very, very dynamic athlete who we have yet to see a whole lot of, who could be, a breakout player if he gets some playing time.
Yeah. Barriere is freakishly athletic. Won the FCS Heisman, I believe, the Walter Payton Award. Shown some flashes in his cameo appearance last year, but I mean, he needs to just get on the field and see what he's got going on. They did a good job about retooling the receiver room, bringing in AJ Richardson, Trey Quinn, a couple other guys, Isaiah McCoy, a bunch of guys like that, and then picking up 2 tight ends like Cole Hikatuni and Kyle Markway as well really help. And they got a pretty decent running back room as well, led by Reggie Corbin. But another guy you got to always watch out for is not Cam Scarlett, which we don't even know if he's coming back. But Stevie Scott's uber versatile as well, so he can kind of fill that role as the pass catching back if Scarlett doesn't return.
Definitely. I actually really like the running back room they've built. With Corbin returning, despite the fact that he was drafted by the XFL, you also got Stevie Scott back from the NFL, and then Josh Adams, who I think is a great signing. Adams was pretty valuable for a stretch of time there for the Philadelphia Eagles. Big reason why I know who he is. But at the same time, he was a great running back for a short stretch in the NFL. I think he's a guy who's probably going to dominate in the USFL this season. But again, one of those things that remains to be seen. And then you talked about Trey Quinn very briefly. What do you expect from Trey Quinn this season? Is he a guy that you're not quite sure? You expect him to dominate?
I mean, it really comes down to his role. He's definitely a slot guy, but because it is an alt league, is he going to be forced to be on the outside a little bit more? They got some speedy receivers that could really spread the field. I'd love to see an air raid attack coming out, next year. But they do have a decent little, what's the word I'm looking for? A decent little pool of receivers to pull from, and they definitely attack the position along with the offensive line a decent amount too to continue moving forward into next year. The Panthers were in a lot of games last year. It's kind of unfortunate that their record doesn't indicate how well they played, but they had a lot of close games to, the Stallions, Generals, the Gamblers, and you win a couple of those games. Next thing, you go from that 2-8 to a 5-5, and you're like, okay, our team wasn't that bad last year. Especially the game to the Stars where Carazola missed the field goal. So that's a win right there. Yeah,
you're not lying. That was 100% a victory in the bag that was basically taken away by a missed kick. So
yep.
You're not wrong. There was actually several games by the Panthers last season that I thought they should have won as well. I mean, personally, I thought they had one of the better coaching staffs in the league, one of the more underrated coaching staffs in the league for that matter, given the fact that a lot of these guys are from D3 schools or something like that you haven't really heard of before. But obviously, as you know, thanks to your help, I had Eric Marty, the offensive coordinator, on here for an interview, and I'm a huge fan of him. I think he's a future head coach personally, so I'm excited to see what he can do with this offense in 2023 and ultimately who he has his eye on as quarterback, because he's a former quarterback himself, as we all know.
Yeah.
So transitioning to defense, as we know, one of the guys that I once talked to, Dan Carell, is now gone. What is your thought on the Michigan Panthers defensive coordinator position? Do you ultimately see a situation where it's a committee approach? Is Jeff Fisher going to take over? Or are we looking at possibly an outside candidate?
I would think that Fisher's going to have his hands in it as well, but he brings up a young guy just because I think for Jeff, and I've never talked to Jeff or anything like that, but for him to do the USFL, this is more of a passion project for him. I don't think he wants to go to the NFL unless the situation was right, of course. But I think now he is kind of just hanging out, coaching football. Ironically enough, I know one of his ex-girlfriends and pretty well. And as per her, all he wants to do is just kind of fly fish and hang out and, relax right now. So I believe he's up in Montana during the off season, kind of just living his best life. So, I mean, I'd like to see them bring in a young guy, kind of Fisher, groom him. But whoever they get, they need to really, really up that pass rush. They had Kayvon Walker, and now they're bringing in Breland Speaks and Robert Nundy. And so now they've definitely made some strides, some things up, especially with the loss of TJ Carter. But those boys need to get some sacks. Like, that's really what it came down to. Sometimes that pass rush looked non-existent, and now you're putting more stress on the linebackers. They had some pretty underrated defensive backs last year. Jamison Houston, now in the XFL, was an NFL guy for a little bit, and then Tino Ellis stayed with the Dolphins. You also had Sean Williams, the captain, playing there as well. And right now they're returning Corey Rockman. They also picked up Levante Taylor, who was a 5-star recruit at Florida State. So hopefully he can retool into that. Not a real successful collegiate career, but he had potential at one point. So let's see if Fisher, a former defensive back, can kind of unlock that a bit.
Absolutely. It's going to be very interesting this season. Given the names that you just mentioned, Ndici and Breland Speaks, I'm personally very, very interested to see where Speaks ultimately lines up. I've talked to you guys about it off camera. He's a guy who played outside linebacker for the Chiefs at like 285 pounds. Me personally, I put him inside at the defensive tackle slot, but we'll see what they do in Michigan. So personally, I like your thought process about bringing in a young guy and kind of grooming him to eventually be a coordinator. That's essentially what happened with Dan Carell, a very young guy who had never been a coordinator before, and now he's getting a coordinator position at the college level because of his work here with Michigan. So anyway, I'm very interested to hear your personal opinion. Basically, with the way the Michigan Panthers are built currently, without the quarterback situation being alleviated, what's your record prediction for the season?
Man, part of it comes down to the stars. Who are they bringing back at quarterback? Obviously, Scott's available, Costello's available, as well as Cookus. Now he did not sign a futures contract. I definitely seek an improvement. That 5-5, 6-4 range could really, really, be a very realistic thing and a playoff push. Luis Perez not being there for the Generals. How much are you going to want DeAndre Johnson to throw the ball? Are they going to go to Kyle Lauletta to kind of do that 2 QB system? It's all very possible. And, the Maulers, for the sake of football, I just hope they're a lot better. I still think the Stallions are the team to beat, though.
That's fair. I mean, they got to return their quarterback and a good majority of their roster. They did lose some very key guys. Jordan McRae, their center, DeMarcus Gates, the guy we spoke about earlier, still with Chicago as far as I know. There's a bunch of different guys that did leave, but they also had some interesting free agent acquisitions. So definitely looking for Birmingham to be pretty solid in 2023 again. So I'm going to leave you with one last question. You are currently kind of working on launching a YouTube channel. So why don't you give our viewers a quick rundown of what your thought is on your channel and ultimately like what they can expect from your show and where they can find it.
So my show, I'm just kind of doing little blips right now. My work life is pretty ridiculous. I won't get too into it for obvious reasons, but my work life is pretty ridiculous. If people kind of knew, they maybe would be nicer to me. But regardless, I'm doing little blips here and there when I'm on the road of just whatever pops into my head. My channel's called Analyze and Educate. You'll see some other random videos I have on there of some of my little work things I've done, which I'm phasing out. But yeah, I'll be doing little clips here and there, just my thoughts. I just did a video right before we came on. Still learning how to edit and do all that goofy stuff about Lewerke leaving the Dragons and bringing in Harrison Frost. So, I'm going to be in this space for a while, covering the XFL and the USFL. Based off my living situation, I kind of reside in a couple different places throughout the states. So I'll be able to attend some Birmingham games and some Memphis games. I'm going to try to get to Michigan while also going to a decent amount of Battlehawks games as well. So, if you see me around, say hi. I have no problem talking to you, even if you're semi-harassing me on the internet anonymously. That's more of a you problem than me. So, yeah, that's really it.
Definitely looking forward to it. One last question, just for my own humor here. What are your attendance expectations for Ford Field this season for Michigan Panthers home games? Just ballpark.
Man, I think they're in that 5 to 15 range easily, especially if they're good. Believe it or not, the best and worst thing that happened to the Panthers was the Lions being good, because because now it's going to generate interest of football, I think. But if the Lions were bad, even if the Panthers were bad, I felt like people would keep showing up just because they're like, well, this is better than what we're going to get in 5 months or something goofy like that.
That's a fair point. I mean, honestly, I personally think it's going to be very interesting to see them in Detroit. Home games will be something I'll be wanting to see, see how the crowds respond in Detroit and Ohio and Memphis, because, we saw in Birmingham that they were solid for Birmingham games, but other than that, it was kind of very paltry, and it was one of those things where a lot of us were talking about it. So I'm interested to see how much we can see of an improvement there, and hopefully these 4 hubs in 2023 ends up with a lot more people in the seats in 2023 as well. But I guess we'll see. So
I actually think this helps Birmingham, because now you're not stressing the local populace to show up every week. So now people don't have to go to games every week in that, one hub. So now it actually might be like, okay, babe, like, I know we bought these season tickets, but like now we can just go to, 6 to 8 games instead of all 10, and then stay for the other games. So now it's kind of like, I love the Stallions. The Stallions are growing, obviously, in Birmingham. Winning a championship doesn't hurt whatsoever. So now it kind of alleviates, I think, the stressors. So I think Birmingham is actually going to look better going into 2023, which we can knock those other teams, but if you're going off the local market, Birmingham did a pretty okay job.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about Birmingham supporting their team, I don't think there was any issues. And actually, it was quite encouraging when you ultimately looked at the opening numbers. Now, I don't want to say that their XFL support numbers in terms of 2020, but to be fair, I think the XFL was kind of the exception to the rule, so to speak. Like 2020 XFL was like the tip tops of support you can expect for a spring league right out of the box like that.
Yeah. I mean, St. Louis is going to show up, whether it's you or me playing quarterback. So don't worry about St. Louis. Texas, I think, will be fine. Arlington might have out of the 3 Texas teams kind of the worst showing, just based off a hunch type thing. Houston, because the Texans were so bad and Houston's a football city, I think they'll be fine. But I think all 3 teams will be fine there. If Arlington's good, then they're number 2 right off the bat. Vegas could be hit or miss personally, just because Vegas, if I'm going to a show and then I get, kind of messed up at the show, I'm probably not going to the Vegas Vipers, to see Luis Perez unless, I'm an alt league guy. But Vegas will also get a lot of walk-ups who, yeah, man, let's go to this football game as well. DC could be, hit or miss just because it's DC, it's Virginia. You don't know, or, the DMV area. But they bring the beer snake back. That'll generate a lot of interest as well. And now you're chalking it up to the Guardians, where it's like, let's go off what we saw with the Apollos and the Rage. But then I've heard, a bunch of people are pumped that the XFL is coming back, and they're breaking out their Rage gear as well. I believe that was talked about on the Markcast a little bit.
I think it'd be super cool to see fans with, gear from 2020 or 2001, 2020, and 2023 all in the stands. It'll be kind of a cool mixture to see. I mean, I know it's going to be few and far between the people who have merch left from 2001, but at the same time, it's going to be around. It'll be interesting to see for sure.
You got to go on Royal Retros to get your 2021 XFL gear.
Exactly. Quick shout out to Royal Retros. Their gear is pretty awesome.
Yep.
They also support the Markcast, so always nice to support them.
The Markcast and the Alumni Academy. They do the jerseys for the Alumni Academy.
I was not aware of that. That's awesome.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep. Right on that left or right shoulder. I don't remember, but yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out now. But thanks for once again filling me in on a bit of information there. I appreciate that. Yep. So once again, man, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I literally can't overstate the kind of coverage that you bring us for these alt football leagues. I really can't, because nobody else is out there tracking the statistics that you do, tracking the movement like you do. A lot of us try, but you're literally just next level when it comes to this stuff. So, personally, if you're an alt league fan and you're watching this and you don't know about Pat yet, you should. So go follow him. Again, NFL QB Talk on Twitter. He's going to give you all kinds of information you want to know, most likely, if you're a nerd like us when it comes to the alt football league. So definitely check him out. Check out all his articles on XFL News Hub and USFL News Hub. But once again, man, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm super excited to hopefully have you back real soon.
Yeah, I appreciate coming on. Guys, if you see me at a game or something like that and you want to have a conversation, definitely go for it. My DMs are always open, no matter where your allegiances lie. So, I have no problem talking. Like you said, NFL QB Talk, Analyze and Educate on YouTube, and Pat from Cali on Instagram. So, like I said, get to know me a little bit and see a little bit about my life.
No doubt. Have a great rest of your night, man, and I will definitely speak at you later.
Thank you.
Absolutely.